it's not about a platform. It is about legacy. We need to understand that that's what God is doing through you. That's what He wants to do through you. But you got to understand that. You got to understand, I got to understand that it's not about you. It's not about me. Hey, I'm Andrea Olson. I've been leading worship and training worship leaders for nearly 20 years, and my mission is to support worship leaders just like you in volunteer-supported ministries because I know what it's like. I've been there. It's amazing, but you have a big job, and sometimes you might feel a little bit alone. But I'm here to remind you that you aren't. We'll cover spiritual and leadership growth, practical resources, and get encouragement from other worship leaders from all over the world. I truly want to see you lead from the overflow, not the overwhelm. So grab a cup of tea or coffee and join me. Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm so glad that you are here. So I got to tell you, I've been doing this podcast for quite a while. We started in 2018, I think, and we're coming up on episode 100. And we just changed some things, right? Like we've got new intros and new outros and new way we're doing commercials, and we're on video now. And it's so funny because I was chatting with my team about me recording these, and they just gently said, hey, you don't have to say, hey, welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast anymore because it's in the intro. And so now every time I hit record on this thing, I'm just going over in my brain, okay, don't say that, don't say that. And then I overthink everything. Does anyone else ever do that? And I think oh, should I be hey, or should I say, how's it going? I just go through this dumb thing in my head, these mental gymnastics of, not wanting to sound dumb. So anyways, hello. I'm glad that you're here. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. I am so excited. It is the month of April, and I love the month of April. We live in Minnesota. If you're new here, I'm from Minnesota. And, the month of April is like the beginning of spring for us. And I mean, technically it really could snow. It's the 10th today when this releases, and it's it could snow in the end of April. It could snow May 1st, or we could be done now. We don't really know, but there's promise of spring. And I'm excited because I'm planting my garden and just waiting for the snow to melt so that we can plant things. And I'm excited for the trees to start budding and for the lilacs to start blooming. We have some apple trees and some lilac trees on our property. And honestly, it's just my favorite thing. We moved about, almost 2 years ago now, which is really crazy to say out loud because it feels like it wasn't that long ago. But I was so excited when the very first spring came around and I realized how many lilac trees we had on our property because they're so beautiful and they are my favorite. It's a short season, but it's so pretty. They're so fragrant and just so full of flowers and scent, and they completely changed the landscape around Minnesota. I don't know about you and where you're at, but it's only about a 2-week period for us here in Minnesota. And it's interesting because the trend around here is to not only place them, in the middle of your yard or whatever, but also to line the border of your property with them. And so you just have this line of purple and white, whether it's, your property line around the edges, or it's, up and down your driveway. And it's so beautiful when they flower, but then when the flowers are gone, they serve a really practical purpose for blocking the wind because they're really thick, they're full, they're green, and, they're even pretty when they're not blooming, I think. And it's like the rest of the growing season, they serve a purpose even when the flowers aren't there, and even when they're not kind of center stage, they still serve a great purpose. And eventually, they need to be pruned, but these trees, these lilac bushes last for decades. They flower year after year after year. Now, someday we're going to have to replace these lilac trees that we have in our on our property and start over with new ones because, they only last so long. Winters are harsh here, and I'm sure that maybe lessens their length of life. But then we get to start over with something new and something fresh, which is also exciting. And, that makes me think of our topic for today. And I wanted to share with you about some of the things that I've been learning as I've been reading through the Old Testament. I've been struck by some brand new things. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that, I love how scripture can jump off the page in a new way every single time I read it. And I've committed to challenge myself to read through the Bible each year. And I try a different approach every year. So I guess one year, technically, I didn't read through the whole Bible because I committed to read through the New Testament 4 times, once a quarter. And so technically, I guess that wasn't an entire read through the Bible. But for the most part, I try a different approach every year and a different translation and a different guide. And so this year I'm reading the ESV version and I'm following the Bible recap plan on YouVersion. And I've just loved this different translation. And I do love the podcast that goes along with the Bible recap. Tara Lee Cobble is her name. And she just brings some great insight. And I love to hear the things that she has to say and learn, what she's learning. And so I'm going to share with you what I'm learning. And so I'm in the book of Deuteronomy right now. And, this book in the Old Testament is kind of a recap of what has already happened, right? Moses is retelling this new generation of Israelites and saying, hey, look, this is what happened. God delivered you out of Egypt, and then your parents rebelled in the wilderness. And so we've been wandering around here for 40 years, and, you're about to enter the promised land. So I'm going to recap all of this for you and tell you what you need to remember moving forward, right? And so in chapter 1, verses 37 and 38, Moses is talking about his succession plan, or God's succession plan, really. So if you remember correctly from the story, originally there was a time when they were in the wilderness and God told Moses to bring, I'm going to work through you to bring forth water from this rock, right? And Moses didn't do it in the way that God wanted him to, or that God told him to. And so God said, because of that, you don't get to enter the promised land either. So I've already punished this current generation of Israelites, and now because of this, you don't get to go in either. So I'm just setting up verses 37 and 38 in Deuteronomy chapter 1. It says, even with me, the Lord was angry. So this is Moses talking. Even with me, the Lord was angry on your account and said, you also shall not go in there, referring to the promised land. Joshua, the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall enter. Encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. Talking about the promised land. Okay, so let's just pause for a minute. Let's talk about Moses. How hard would this have been? I have always read through these passages of scripture and felt really sorry for Moses. Like, how fair is this, right? I mean, here he is. He has devoted his entire life to these whiny people, and all they do is complain and say, you should have left us in Egypt when we lived in paradise, when it's like, wait a minute, weren't you slaves? How is that paradise? And they basically persecuted him, right? And never said thank you, like, from what we know in scripture, from what we hear. And I just have always felt bad for him because my personality is like, it just doesn't seem right. God, like, it doesn't seem right that after all of his hard work, I mean, I know that he was really well known and famous in the land with the Israelites and the surrounding nations and all of that. But it's like, couldn't he go into God? And I've always felt that just level of sadness for him. And God opened my eyes this time around when I was reading this passage in Deuteronomy, and he opened my eyes to something new. And it's not that I don't feel bad for Moses anymore, but it was like I was able to just see one layer deeper about God's eternal plan. What about his legacy plan? His purpose, God's purpose, was for the baton to be passed to Joshua. It was time. And, maybe the new generation of Israelites would follow a new leader better. Maybe they would hear from him better because this is a new generation. These are the kids and the grandkids of the original, nation that came out of Egypt. And, maybe there were just so many things and so many factors at play that God was like, no, it's time, because this new season requires new leadership. Now, did Joshua learn everything from Moses? Well, yeah, he did. Just as a side note though, okay, I am so struck by the piece of scripture where it says that God would talk to Moses as a man talks to a friend. I just think that would be so amazing. Sometimes when I'm praying for things, I'm like, can I just get you to come give me an audible voice so I know that it's you and I can get an answer, right? Moses has this incredible wisdom to impart to Joshua, right? And he's been training Joshua. If you know the story of the Old Testament, Joshua gets mentioned a lot, right? And so he's been shadowing and training under Moses for years, but maybe it's time. It was time. And Moses knew that, right? Moses probably knew that it was time to step back. And that takes a really strong, humble leader to know when it's time to step back. And also to know, like, this new season, even though I'm sad that I'm not going with, right? This new season of the Israelites crossing into the promised land requires new leadership. Now, let's just recap a little bit about what we know about Joshua, right? Joshua was one of the two people who came back. So there were all the spies that Moses sent, decades before into the promised land to scope it out, right? And they all came back, and it was only Caleb and Joshua who said, yeah, we believe God. We can take these guys. Let's trust God. Let's do this. And the rest of them were like, no way. There's giants there. It's too scary. We can't go, right? So Joshua is brave. We know that about him. And so what was needed moving into this new season was maybe that bravery. And we know, like, if you are someone who knows the stories of the Old Testament, you know about the battles at Jericho and all the battles that they fought, and Joshua was leading that, right? And think about this. I mean, Moses, obviously super wise, amazing, great leader, all the things. But if you remember from way back in the beginning when God appeared to him through the burning bush, Moses was like, I can't talk very good, and I really don't want to go back there. So I think you should send someone else. And he says that like 3 times of like, don't send me, send someone else, right? And so Moses, he maybe had a very different personality, a different leadership style, even though Joshua trained under him. They're 2 very different people with probably different leadership styles. And, what I love about this is that it was so clear through this that God always had that legacy plan in mind. He always did. And he knew that it was time, that Moses' time of blooming, kind of like the lilac bushes that I talked about in the beginning, Moses' time of blooming was done. And for a while, he was a safe protection on the perimeter, right? And then eventually he would be gone, and it would be time for a new leader to step in to do something new. Now, something that Moses knew all along was that eventually his time would be up, right? He had a succession plan. He approached it with humility, knowing that it wasn't about his platform. It was about legacy. God's generational plan for building a legacy, a long-term strategy that all points to Jesus and ultimately to the condition of our hearts for eternity, our salvation through Jesus, right? That was God's plan all along. And that's just what I was just so struck by in this small little section of verses. I mean, obviously I laid out a ton of context for you, but it's like when Moses said, God told me Joshua's going to be the one, so raise him up. It's like, yeah, because I'm not going to take you all the way. So I need to lead with that in mind. So where am I going with this? You maybe know, but I'm going to lay it out for you. As worship leaders, it's so easy for us to get caught up in the platform part of it, isn't it? Like, culture tells us, build your platform, make your name known, right? And that gets tricky in the Christian world, in worship and in church, doesn't it? Because it's like this tension of, yes, you need to, get out into the community and make sure people know about your church and know who your church is so that they know that they have a safe place to go. But also this culture of social media and live streaming and all of that, we have access to what everybody else is doing all the time. And so it's tricky. It's counterintuitive because it's like we like want to grow and we want people to know our name or the name of our church for kingdom purpose, right? But sometimes that gets gray. Sometimes our humanness creeps in and we start to think like, yeah, this is about me. This is about like my, whether you're a worship pastor on staff. So it's like, this is about growing my team and the church. And this is about, what I'm doing right now, or whether you're writing songs and releasing music. And then it can become about that and about our name. And let me just tell you, none of those things are bad on their own, right? But it's not about that. We have to make sure that we're checking the condition of our hearts because it's not about a platform. It gets confusing and messy sometimes because we know at our core that it has to be about the heart. Like, that's really easy to say, right? I almost feel cliche just saying that because you're like, duh, yeah, I know. But somehow it still gets lost in the mix of life and busy. And so I just want to challenge all of us today. So build a platform? No. I say build a legacy. That's what God was doing through Moses, and Moses understood that. He might not have liked it, right? And that this might rub you the wrong way a little bit. And I'm okay with that because I want you to sit and think about this because my heart is coming from a place of such a genuine care for you. And just, I want to come at this gently with you, but also to directly say, like, it's not about a platform. It is about legacy. We need to understand that that's what God is doing through you. That's what he wants to do through you. But you got to understand that. You got to understand, I got to understand that it's not about you. It's not about me. So whatever God chooses to do through you is not up to you. And I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but sometimes when I hear people say that, I'm like, well, yeah, that's easy for you to say. You're like, have this huge, platform, right? But that's totally beside the point. It doesn't matter. What God gives you to steward is an honor, and it's not up to us to decide if it's good enough or not. So your job is to be faithful and to really make it not at all about you and all about what God is doing through you for his long-term plan, for his legacy plan. So don't, as a worship leader, because most of you are worship leaders or worship team members, don't build something that only works if you're there. Let other people in, raise them up. Diversify who does what, delegate, build something that someone else can step into and lead with ease and not have to step in and clean up your messes after you're gone. We have to lead with the end in mind. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean the end? End of life? Sure, you can go there, but how about rather just take it to the end of your time at that assignment. So if you're in a church right now or whatever worship capacity you're serving in, think about what it will be like when you're not there and lead with that in mind, right? Set it up for the next person to step in and be like, wow, I want to meet Sally because she's awesome. This is so easy. Like stepping into this is so easy because you built up a team and you built up, relationship and you put systems in place and you empowered those on your team to step in and lead rather than you just like always being the one to do everything. Now, that doesn't mean that, now you got to overthink, oh man, should I not lead every song anymore or whatever? No, don't overthink it. Just find natural, easy ways to bring other people in and empower them to begin to grow in their leadership as well. And that's what Moses did. And that's probably why it worked so well and why he's regarded as like the best leader in the Old Testament. He's quoted all the time, everywhere, Old and New Testament. So what can you do today to lead with the end of your current assignment in mind? And hey, if you want to go there, because this is where I like to go, lead with the end of your life in mind, right? When you're gone, whatever you leave behind is your legacy, good or bad. And that's convicting and thought-provoking and powerful. Don't you want to be known for focusing on stewarding whatever ministry God placed in your hands with the very best care you possibly can, and leading with the understanding that you want to set it up to thrive after you're gone, even if you're gone from this position in 1 year or 50 years? That's legacy. And I'm just scratching the surface. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but my time is just about up here. But I wanted to share with you that is what we're going to focus on for the Overflow Worship Conference 2023. It's coming up in October in Wilmer, Minnesota. And I am so excited to share all of this with you about building a legacy, not a platform. Now, is it bad? I'm just going to say this one more time because I don't want anybody to be messaging being like, you hypocrite because you release music and, people know your name. I get it. Is it bad to release music and have people know your name or to, make money off of music sales or, whatever? No, of course not. Is it bad to grow as a church? No, growth is a sign of health. So that growth, good. But our heart and our approach in the process matters big time, like so much. And we have an opportunity to pour into the next generation with our leadership. Like it or not, the next generation is coming up. Eventually, we will be gone and they are going to be up to the plate. And how tragic would it be if we never gave them the opportunity? We just always were like, okay, yep, when you're grown up, when it's like, well, when it's just like at home, right? If any of you are parents, our home is a training ground for our kids. And so if we're just like, yeah, well, when you get out into the real world, you'll figure it out. It's like, no, they won't. They have to learn at home. And so one of the things that we do in our home every day is we practice things, like even little things, like we practice passing the serving bowls around the table in a timely and thoughtful manner, because guess what? When you're at somebody else's house, how could I possibly just expect you to step in and know what to do and not, be rude and, reach in with your hands from the serving bowl and put it on your plate? How would you know if nobody told you? Because your home is the training ground. And it's the same thing. How will this next generation know if nobody tells them? And so just remember, we cannot leave the next generation to just figure it out. We have to teach them and we have to give them a safe place to fail. So you know what? They might get up there and screw up sometimes, but that is okay. I'm guessing that you did the same thing. I know I did. I have so many stories of the different times where humiliating things have happened to me. So if you ever need to feel better about yourself, you just let me know and I can help you with that. So I just want to encourage you that you have such a powerful opportunity to steward something so special. And it actually, when it all comes down to it, it takes the pressure off because, you don't have to worry about like, well, this all depends on me, right? All of this depends on me, so I have a lot of pressure. No, it doesn't, right? No, it doesn't. It all depends on God and how He plans to use you, how He wants to use you in the position that He has placed you in the ministry that He has called you to, whether you're there for a day or a month or a year or 50 years. He has a purpose for you there. And whether you change positions frequently, or you're in one spot for a long time, or you just volunteer and you lead occasionally serving at your local church and you're not on staff, whatever you find yourself in, it's the same calling for all of us to lead with that end in mind, lead with legacy in mind, because we want to build a legacy to step into the long-term plan that God has, not making our own plan, not building our own platforms, but building His, right? And so I just want to leave you with that today and encourage you to lead with the end in mind and build a legacy, not a platform. Thank you so much for taking your precious space from your day to listen to today's episode. I'm truly honored that you chose to be here. If you loved today's episode and you haven't already, I would be so blessed if you would take 30 seconds and leave a review. I read every single one, and not only does it help us keep delivering you relevant content, but it helps us reach more people. It makes us searchable on the platforms and kind of all the things that I don't like about algorithms. They're just true. And if you haven't already, be sure to snag my completely free guide for creating an effective and engaging set list every single time. Get my set list checklist at overflowworship.com/setlist-checklist. Thank you again so much for listening. And don't forget, I truly believe that you can thrive with what you have where you are. I am cheering for you as you build a legacy for the long term. And until next time, keep on thriving.